Hey everybody, DJ here, and this is going to be on the ProRender 3.0 basic materials and the RPR Uber node. If you haven't yet, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can get all the updates on the newest stuff. And make sure that you check out our Discord server. The link is below. And I also have a Patreon if you'd like to become a patron. There's some really cool benefits for you there. And let's go ahead and jump into Blender. And basically, I'm just going to do a quick overview of how to set up your file. So right now, I just have some basic elements. I have the LuxCore render ball. So, maybe that's bad. I'm using that instead of the ProRender one, but it's fine. I'll provide a link below where you can download this model. I have a Suzanne or monkey head here, and then I have a really basic plane. And I went over this in the LuxCore video on how to basically make these, but in my opinion, when you're testing out different materials, what you want to do is have your objects here, have a couple different ones, and just see what it looks like on a couple different objects. Don't just, test it out on a ball or just, a cube or something like that, because chances are it's going to render quite a bit differently depending on the geometry and if you have like a hollow one like this here or something like that. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to show you what my current version is for those of you who are following along and you might have a different version of this add-on. So if I check the ProRender here, and you can see right here I'm using version 3.0.15. And what I'm going to be showing you here is in the full render quality. There is a legacy one, so that's great. But what I'm going to be showing you is the RPR Uber node basic setting of materials, and I'm not going to go over glass in this one. That's going to be handled on a separate tutorial because it really needs its own thing. I'm just going to show you some basics on how things work within the 2.0 renderer in this version. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this material that I have set here on these because I already kind of like did some testing. And we're just going to start from scratch, and I'm going to show you how this stuff works, okay? Now, for your background, I'm going to show you really quick how you can add you'll see this right here, environment light IBL. You want to put in a HDRI, and you can get that from HDRI Haven, and you can get any of these. So let's just go ahead and grab a basic outside one like this. These usually look really nice. And when we go into the rendered view, and before we do that, let's go to the settings here. Make sure that in sampling, you have the viewport preview sampling set to minimum of 16 and the maximum to 32. And go ahead and set this preview samples here to 32 as well. That will make it a lot easier for your computer to handle what's going on here. The next thing is what we want to do is make sure you're using your GPU, or you can use both. ProRender 3.0 is really great at using multiple render devices, so you can turn both of these on, but I'm just going to use my one RTX 3090, and I've heard that ProRender works better with AMD GPUs. So if you have an AMD GPU, that's fantastic. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and save my file, and I'm going to hit Z and go to the rendered view. And just for everybody, if you're new, down here in the bottom left, you're going to see a keyboard and a mouse. That's basically going to show all my commands. Normally, I'd have a screencast that shows a couple of the other button presses, but for this one, you really don't need that. So we move around the screen, you can see that there's a render, like sort of square that goes across the frame. And that's basically how this render engine works. It's going to have kind of a tile system that goes from the center out, and they made it to where when you move around, you can actually get a quick update. This is with the beta. With the official release, I think it was a little bit slower, so you might just see an outline or something. So I do recommend getting the beta releases, and I cover that in my previous tutorial on the download, so you might want to check that out. I'll throw a card in right here so you can see it. And you can see here that we just have some basic stuff, okay? It has sort of like a material already set, but we're going to set some custom materials, okay? And let's just go to solid view here, and we're going to split the panel. And on the right, we're going to change this to the shader editor. And we're just going to move this over. And there's nothing here, okay? Now, if you have not deleted all the materials like I did, you might actually have a material there, but we're going to start with the floor here. I made a ground plane, and over here, if we go to the material properties, you can just click on this right here that says new, okay? And you can use the Principled BSDF, and for the floor, we're actually going to go ahead and change this to a black, something like that. And we're just going to leave all this stuff just like that as it is. And I'm going to change the viewport to this rendered view. And now we have this as our ground plane. Okay, awesome. So next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a basic material. So I'm going to click on the monkey head here. I'm going to click on new, and I'm going to change this to RPR underscore Uber. Okay. And then I'm going to shift select all of my other objects besides the floor. And I'm going to go back to the monkey head, and I'm going to hit Control L to link materials. So now whenever I change the materials on here in one object, it's going to change it for all of my objects in the scene. So we can see how when we mess with these things, it changes how the rendering is done. So if I just take a look at the Principled BSDF right here, most of the things that you change here are going to be reflected over here. And I do recommend that you save quite a bit because sometimes it does crash. So just keep that in mind. It really depends on your video card and all that. But if you kind of like click and drag like you would in Cycle, sometimes that will crash this viewport here. But if we change this to a color like red or something like that, you can see that it's updating over here, and we can see it just like you would in Cycles. And the same thing here, if you change the subsurface to like a 0.5 or something like that, let's actually change the base color to a white. Let's change the subsurface to a red, just so you can see it working. And we'll change the subsurface to something like a 0.75 to make it more obvious. You can see that there is a subsurface scattering happening. Okay. Now, if you change the Christian Burley here to or Christensen Burley to a random walk, it doesn't exactly work. Okay. So the random walk is, as far as I know, not currently working for the subsurface scattering, which is kind of a detriment because it is a really great subsurface scatterer for Cycles, but um, it is what it is. So let's change the subsurface back to 0, and let's go ahead and move the metallic shader up. So if we move the metallic setting right here up to a 1, you can see that now has metal. And if we take the specular and we pop it up to a 1, it does actually change how things are working within the scene. Okay. Actually, the specular doesn't look like it's as obvious as other sliders, but that's fine. Take the roughness down to 0. You can see that it's, shiny. If you want to throw some anisotropic and throw some roughness on, you can see if we zoom in a bit, you can see that the anisotropy is actually being applied. Now, I will point this out. If you take a look here, you can see that there's this funky pattern going on. I'm not really sure why ProRender is not rendering out anisotropy very well on the full setting. It's something that I've been contacting them about, but I would recommend right now not necessarily using the anisotropic setting. But it's a work in progress still, and hopefully they get that resolved. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn that off real quick. And basically, I'm not going to waste your time. A lot of the things in here works. Transmission doesn't exactly work, so I wouldn't necessarily use that. But most of the things will work completely fine with the Principled BSDF. Now, the problem is that a lot of other nodes inside of when you use Cycles, you do all these other node setups and all that. They don't all work the same way with ProRender. So my recommendation is always to start from scratch, or you can watch other conversion tutorials that I have on my channel to see how you can bake out your textures and convert over to ProRender. But I always recommend that you should know what engine you want to kind of start in. That way, when you start to build out your materials, you build it according to that particular render engine, whether it's LuxCore or whether it's Cycles or Eevee or whatever. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do a very, very basic conversion. And if you have a bunch of stuff set on your Principled BSDF and you come over here to underneath surface with the materials properties open, you can click this button right here. It says convert Principled to Uber. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this onto this viewport shading so that we don't get any sudden crashes. And I'm just going to click this button. And you'll see that it basically keeps the Principled BSDF here. It moves it up, but now there's an RPR Uber node. And this is really how this engine, in my opinion, where it shines, is this node is actually pretty great for some very quick materials. And to really go through this quickly and easily, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this kind of step by step, okay? So I'm going to start here with the diffuse, and we're going to go back into the rendered view, and I'm going to explain how this works. So with this node, As you add layers to this, whereas here on the Principled BSDF, you kind of like pull the slider up, here you kind of like turn them on and off with these different buttons. And you can actually add a mix shader or add shaders here to mix these together. If you just wanted to have one be a diffuse and another one be a coating or something like that, you could do that to mix them together. But why do that when you can have it all in one giant Uber node like this? It makes it all very easy. So if we take a look here, we're not going to really worry about this one here. But if you look here for the diffuse weight, this basically is like how much of that particular, and you'll see this for all of them, it will say weight. And that's basically how much of that part of the shading of that way of shading that object do you want portrayed inside of your scene. So 1 means all the way, 0 means none. Color, same thing as any other time, it just changes the color. And the roughness makes it either somewhat shiny or somewhat rough. And when you just have this diffuse, it really doesn't show a whole lot as far as the roughness versus the shininess. There is a little bit of a difference, but you don't get kind of like those reflections in the scene that you would normally see um, when you have a shiny object. And that's because you need to add the reflection. Now, before we go into the reflection, I do want to quickly show you this right here, which is separate backscatter color. Okay, so if I turn that on and we make the backscatter color something opposite, like a blue or something, and we take the backscatter weight and we turn it to a 0.5, you can see that now it has changed how that rendering is done. Okay, and if I change this to a 1, you can see that now it's a full backscatter, and 0.95 or something like that, you can see that there's basically variations of that. When I take the lamp and I move it over, you can see that how the viewport is showing this is that it's basically the light that's passing through this is changing that color. Okay, so for leaves on a plant or something like that, that's something that you want to use this for. Basically, something that when you shine a light through it, it's going to change the color. Plastics can do this. All sorts of things have this sort of effect. So, this is where you kind of want to use that if you want something to be kind of like see through on the other side, or you want a different color to be portrayed depending on the light that's shining through it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take that backscatter and I'm going to turn that off. Check this off as well. Okay, so we're done with the diffuse here. I just changed that to a white, and we're going to go ahead and add the reflection right here. So once we do that, if we zoom in, you can see that now there is reflective qualities on this particular object. And I'm just going to talk to you about a couple of the items here that showed up. So first of all, don't worry about the normals. I'll cover that in a later tutorial where we talk about plugging in normals and PBR materials. And this is more of a basics to understand this node here. The metalness versus IOR. So if this is IOR, that means index of refraction. So you can see that when we do that, it does actually change the overall way that the reflection is being rendered here on our object. And if we go back to metalness, and you'll see this better on your screen, it does change how the reflections are calculated in your scene. So just keep that in mind when you're switching between the two. If we take a look here, you see that this reflection weight has been added. So if we take that down to a 0, we can go back to the full-on diffused, so nothing here below the reflection weight will actually work. And we can change the reflection weight and put it anywhere in between. I'm sure that you guys understand how that's working now, so I'll kind of bypass that on any of the other stuff that we add here. So the reflection color, for me to really explain this to you a little bit easier, if you go to the diffuse weight and you put that down to 0, and we just take a look at the reflection part of this shading here, and we look at this, the reflection color is actually changing how when the light hits it, whether it's this lamp here or the HDRI, it's going to change the reflected color that's coming off of that object. So it's a mixture between your diffuse color and then the color that is eventually reflected after it has been hit by the light. So that is how that works, and you can make this a blue color or red color or yellow or whatever, and that is basically how that works. So let's go ahead and add the diffuse weight back, and let's change the diffuse color down to like a black or a darker color or something like that, And let's change the reflection color around, and you can see how that material is now changing. And it's one of the really cool things about this engine and about the Uber shader is that it's very easy to get a very mixed variety of different types of shading because you have this reflection weight that's being calculated, or the reflection color that's being calculated instead of just white, which is what the Principled BSDF kind of does. So I'm going to change this back to a white here, and I'll talk about the metalness right here. So metalness is basically just like it is in any other engine. You turn that on, it changes the way that the reflections are handled to be more of like a metal material, and you can add anisotropy here. And like I said, it has a similar issue as it as I showed you with the Principled BSDF, where it shows this sort of like the geometry is visible, so it doesn't really look that great, and hopefully they get that resolved relatively soon. So I would not necessarily recommend using that on this particular engine right now. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that back off. I'm going to take the reflection metalness and I'm going to turn that back down to 0. Let's also take the diffuse color and let's do something kind of fun. Let's go ahead and add a greenish color to it, something like this. Okay. So now if we're actually going to bypass refraction. We're not going to do glass, but if you want to do glass, that's what you would use. We're going to bypass refraction this time. And we're going to go right to coding. So if we go to coding, it does exactly like the coding effect does on the Principled BSDF. And you can have, let's say on your reflection, you can have a roughness of 1, or you can throw an image in there. And so it has that effect. And then the coding that's basically on the outside of it, you can see that you still have a different set of shininess that you can add. And the really great thing about this is you can add a index of refraction, you can add the roughness for your coating, and you can add a thickness to it as well. So if you put in like a 0.5 or a 1 or something like that, you can basically create a layered up thickness of this coating effect. So like if it's a very polished car with a very thick layer of clear coat or something like that on it, you can get that effect. You can also throw in images to these to change how the roughness is you know reacting, and change the levels of thickness with a black and white image if you wanted to. All kinds of stuff is available to you just by using the presets that are already here. You can also change the color of the coating. So, you could change that to a red. And if we take a look at it, you can see there's that red on the outside of it right there. And the coating transmission color, you can also change and play with those as well as you see fit. So it's really up to you on how you want to, make this look, obviously. And you can play with these all day. Just be careful and start simple before you start getting too crazy, and then you get a big mess and you're not really sure what's going on. So I would just recommend that you go one at a time and just add the stuff that you really, really want to your material. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off coating. And I know that I want this diffuse and the reflection, and I'm going to turn on Sheen. So Sheen is pretty cool. It's basically has the same effect as a velvet or something like that. So if we take the Sheen color here and we change that to a red, and we take the tint and we move it up, and I'm going to turn off the reflection really quick. Let's actually change the diffuse color to something darker so that we can see this a little bit easier. So when I do that, you can see as I move around the object, you can actually see that edge, that red edge along the side there. And that's why I said it's probably good to, take this one at a time and really just start adding as you see fit according to, what you can kind of like see. You can see the effects and you can kind of understand what's going on. So let's go ahead and add back in the reflection. And you can see that Sheen is having that kind of effect. Okay. So let's take the reflection roughness and let's actually put that down to a 0.2. So it's a little bit more shiny. And then you can see that sheen effect right over the top is making that really neat reddish edge coloring that you see there. Okay. And you can change the coloring or the tint and how much that's actually affecting it by changing this here. and you can change the amount of reflection and all that by adjusting these weights, as I mentioned before. So I'm going to turn off Sheen here, and I'm going to turn on Subsurface. And subsurface basically is a subsurface scattering effect, and you can see here when we look at it at different angles, the way that light is passing through the object, it basically changes. And you can take the subsurface weight, put it down to a 0.2 or something like that to make it a little bit more realistic, maybe a 0.5. So you can start seeing through the object like a plastic or skin or something like that. And if I take the light up here, and if I grab it and move it down to about there, you can see that that's having a little bit of a different effect on that plane than it does the rest. And you can see on one side it's green, and then the pass-through effect of the subsurface scattering is that color there. Okay? And if we take that and we also pull it over here to the LuxCore ball, so we haven't really looked too much at that. And pop over here to check it out. We can see how the subsurface scattering effect is happening here. Now, these other effects down here, the subsurface radius and the direction, this actually does change the way that the subsurface scattering is calculated. And I would actually recommend that you check out the manual to really understand how all of this works. There's only so much I can fit in these videos. But basically, you can change the way that the subsurface is being, the subsurface scattering is being calculated by moving these values around here and changing these subsurface radius values. So, like I said, the manual really does a really good job of explaining what those different effects do. And I will be honest, going between the new 2.0 renderer, which again is what we're using here, the full, and if you go back to legacy, it will have a little bit of a different look to it, but it's pretty much the same effects. So I would imagine everything that's in the manual can pretty much be more or less one for one work with the legacy and the 2.0 renderer, except for glass, okay, and volumes, which I will talk about in a later tutorial. So let's go ahead and turn off the subsurface here. And normal, anybody who knows anything about normal maps, basically this is where you plug in your image for your normal map. I'm not going to cover that in this particular tutorial. So that's basically where you add your normal. And you can see here that there's a separate here for the normal. I'm actually going to check this. It looks like I accidentally checked that off there. You can click these little buttons here that will actually separate out the normals, or you can have the entire object have just one normal map that's plugged in here. The last two here is emission and transparency. So let's go ahead and turn off reflection, and I'm going to turn off diffuse. And we have no materials here, and we're just going to turn on transparency. So transparency is exactly what it says here. 0 means that it's opaque, and a 1 means that it's completely invisible. Okay? It looks like we can actually see through some of our objects here with the transparency. So that's a little bit of an issue there that I've never seen before. But transparent, usually you can make it to where you see right through it. Let's turn that back off, and I'll turn on emission. And it basically has the same effect as you would expect. The emission here, you can turn on the double-sided or turn it off, and you can change the intensity here to increase it or decrease it. And there you go. So that's basically how that works. So hopefully you have learned all of the different parts of the RPR Uber node, and you're able to make something really cool. And join me next time when I go over glass and refraction. And there's a little bit more that needs to be gone over with that. So that's why I wanted to separate it. And I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials.